The Veiled War, Radicalization, Religion, and the Iran-Israel Conflict. The emergence of tensions in the Middle East, a historical overview. The Middle East has been, over the last few decades, one of the main foci of global tension. To understand the current dynamic between Iran and Israel, it is fundamental to look back at the past and analyze how regional conflicts developed. Historically, Israel faced Sunni Arab enemies such as Jordan, Syria, and Egypt, countries with which, paradoxically, it normalized relations and signed peace agreements in the 1970s and 1980s. These agreements marked a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape, but they did not eliminate the deep hostilities that permeate the region. What changed, however, was the focus of the conflict. After this period of relative stability with its Arab neighbors, Israel's central confrontations became, in many ways, linked to Iran. Iran, which is not an Arab country but rather Persian and predominantly Shiite, assumed the role of Israel's main antagonist in the regional scenario, a position that has solidified over the last 3 decades. The tension between Iran and Israel is, therefore, the result of an indirect and veiled conflict that has been ongoing for approximately 30 years. This conflict is not limited to conventional territorial or political disputes. It is marked by a complex interaction of economic, strategic, cultural, geopolitical, and above all, ideological and religious factors. Iran, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, has undergone a process of radicalization that has shaped its foreign policy and its relationship with the world. In this context, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) emerged as one of the main forces behind the regime's radicalization and the export of the Islamic Revolution. The Revolutionary Guard is not a conventional army. It was created to protect the clerics and the revolution, and its mission is ideological, to expand the sovereignty of God's law globally. This institution has become a true state within a state, with influence in all areas of Iranian society. The conflict between Iran and Israel, therefore, cannot be understood solely through traditional political or strategic analyses. It is necessary to delve into Iran's religious and ideological formation, especially since the Islamic Revolution, to understand why the country began to adopt such a hostile stance towards Israel. Iran, unlike many of its neighbors, does not recognize the legitimacy of Israel and in many official speeches, openly advocates for the destruction of the Jewish state. This stance is fueled by a worldview that divides the planet between good and evil, between the faithful and the infidels, and that assigns Israel the role of representing evil and Western colonialism. This view is not merely rhetorical, it is deeply rooted in the ideological doctrine that permeates all spheres of the Iranian regime, especially the Revolutionary Guard. Iran's radicalization and its stance towards Israel are, therefore, the result of a complex historical and ideological process, which involves the country's transformation into a theocracy, the consolidation of the Revolutionary Guard as a political and military force, and the adoption of a religious doctrine that justifies the struggle against Israel as part of a sacred mission. To understand this process, it is necessary to analyze how the Revolutionary Guard developed, what its ideological mission is, and how it shapes Iran's foreign and domestic policy. This is the starting point for understanding the current tensions in the Middle East and the central role that religious and ideological issues play in this scenario. The conflict between Iran and Israel is, therefore, not just another regional dispute. It is an expression of a broader struggle, involving antagonistic worldviews, deep religious values, and the pursuit of legitimacy and power in an increasingly complex global scenario. To understand this dynamic, it is necessary to go beyond conventional analyses and delve into the ideological and religious roots that shape the behavior of Iran and its military and political elite. This deep dive will allow us to understand why Iran adopts such a hostile stance towards Israel, and why this hostility is so difficult to overcome through conventional negotiations or diplomatic agreements. From this historical overview, we can proceed to a more detailed analysis of the role of the Revolutionary Guard and its ideological doctrine, which is the true driving force behind Iranian foreign policy and its relationship with Israel. The Revolutionary Guard, as we will see, is not just a military force. It is the guardian of the revolution, the defender of Islamic values, and the main responsible for exporting the regime's ideology to other countries. Its mission is sacred, and its loyalty is to the supreme leader and the worldview he represents. This is the foundation upon which Iran's foreign policy and its relationship with Israel are built. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Origin, mission, and structure. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) is one of the most powerful and influential institutions in contemporary Iran. Its origin dates back to the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when Islamic militias acted as bodyguards for the clerics leading the revolutionary process. These militias, composed of fervent young people loyal to Ayatollah Khomeini, quickly consolidated themselves as the main protective force of the new regime. Over time, the Revolutionary Guard was institutionalized and granted constitutional status, distinguishing itself from the conventional army, whose function is to protect the country's borders. The Guard's mission, however, goes far beyond territorial defense. It is responsible for safeguarding the Shiite clerics and exporting the revolution, both within and outside Iran. The Iranian constitution stipulates that the Revolutionary Guard has an ideological mission of jihad, that is, a struggle for the global expansion of God's law. This means that the Guard is not merely a military force, but rather an ideological army, dedicated to the protection and propagation of the values of the Islamic Revolution. This ideological mission is what differentiates the Revolutionary Guard from other armed forces in the world. It does not exist to defend only the national territory, but to defend and expand a worldview, a religious and political ideology that considers Shiite Islam as the only legitimate form of government and life. The structure of the Revolutionary Guard is complex and comprehensive. In the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, the Guard expanded and created three distinct branches: the Ground Force, Naval Force, and Air Force. With the end of the war in 1988 and the death of Supreme Leader Khomeini in 1989, the Guard strengthened even further. The ascension of the new Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, granted even more power to the Guard with the creation of a new arm, the Quds Force, whose literal translation is Jerusalem Force. These forces became the international arm of the Guard, responsible for overseas operations and supporting allied groups in other countries, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. In addition to the Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard also oversees a voluntary civil militia known as the Basij. The Basij act as internal societal overseers, with members in practically all Iranian institutions, helping to promote and expand the revolution within the country. The Basij are a separate force, but subordinate to the Revolutionary Guard, and play a fundamental role in maintaining social order and disseminating the regime's ideology. The Quds Force, on the other hand, is responsible for operations abroad, functioning as the international arm of the Guard. The Revolutionary Guard, therefore, is a multifaceted institution, with ramifications in all areas of Iranian society. It acts as a military force, ideological police, intelligence agency, and even as an economic force, controlling large companies and strategic sectors of the Iranian economy. This comprehensiveness makes the Guard a true state within a state, with power and influence that rival and often surpass those of the formal government. From the 1990s onward, the Revolutionary Guard began to actively engage in Iranian politics. During the presidency of Mohammad Khatami, a reformist leader who sought to open up the country and minimize religious issues, the Guard perceived a threat and understood that he was giving too much space to student protests, even threatening to depose him. The reformists' failure to advance their agenda of openness led to a boycott by part of the Iranian population in the subsequent elections. As a result, members of the Revolutionary Guard were elected to parliament and municipal councils. In 2005, a member of the Basij militia, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was elected president of Iran, demonstrating the Guard's increasing occupation of political space, including positions in important ministries. This occupation of political space by the Revolutionary Guard intensified over the years. During Ahmadinejad's government, the Guard began to play a significant political role within the regime. When Ahmadinejad sought re-election in 2009, there was widespread fraud, leading to what some consider the beginning of the Arab Spring in Iran with the Green Revolution. Young people and part of the Iranian population took to the streets to protest the fraudulent election. The Revolutionary Guard's response was extremely harsh. At this moment, the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, granted power to an intelligence arm of the Revolutionary Guard that opposed the existing Ministry of Intelligence. Thus, the Guard came to have its own espionage arm, perhaps more powerful than the country's official channels. After this period, in 2013, Hassan Rouhani, considered a moderate by Iranian standards, was elected. However, the Revolutionary Guard did not lose ground. On the contrary, it expanded its influence in cultural, social, and various programs, spreading its ideology and its tentacles of power in the country. The Guard's participation in politics continued to grow, as demonstrated by the 2021 parliamentary elections, with more Guard members occupying positions in parliament. In the Raisi government, the Revolutionary Guard also gained more space, acting as if it commanded the government through political and ministerial appointments, occupying many of the more than 800 positions. All these developments contributed to the expansion and consolidation of the Revolutionary Guard's power within the country. What began in 1979 during the revolution as a militia of 500 members, today occupies spaces in politics, culture, society, and the economy. The strength of the Revolutionary Guard in the Iranian economy is immense, as is its influence and intelligence. It has become a constitutional power, almost a state within a state. It is crucial to understand that it is not a conventional army, but an ideological militia with a religious function, with tentacles in practically all areas. Some even go so far as to say that it is the Revolutionary Guard that truly governs and commands. Ideological indoctrination and radicalization of the Revolutionary Guard. Understanding that the Revolutionary Guard isn't a common army or institution, but rather a religious militia, requires grasping its DNA, its essence. Being an Islamic militia implies possessing an ideological doctrine that demands everyone be incorporated and educated within these ideological matters. This is a fundamental part of the Revolutionary Guard's training. All Guard members are ideologically indoctrinated, and so are their families. More than half of the training to become a Revolutionary Guard member consists of ideological indoctrination, focusing on the Islamic revolutionary views of what the regime entails. Ideological indoctrination became a serious concern for Khamenei, the supreme leader, in 1997. At that time, over 70% of Guard members voted for the reformist candidate against Khamenei's endorsed candidate, an indication that the Guard was losing its ideological compass and becoming more open. At this point, Khamenei realized the need to act. He interpreted that the second generation of the Guard was not committed to the revolutionary ideological DNA and was not loyal to him, thus deciding to intensify indoctrination in the Guard's formation. In 2002, 20% of the curriculum was indoctrination. This number rose to 30% in 2007 to 2008 and reached around 50% in 2009. Remember that 2009 was the year of the Green Revolution, a period of great instability for the regime. It's important to note that ideological evaluations are the most important criterion for promotion within the Guard. It doesn't matter how technical or capable you are, what counts is ideological fidelity to the precepts. This investment in ideological indoctrination bore fruit for Khamenei, as the third and fourth generations of Guard members proved to be much more ideologically aligned and loyal to the regime. This can be observed in the Syrian civil war, when several Guard members volunteered and were called to fight against ISIS or defend the Assad regime in Syria. The majority of those who went were from the third and fourth generations, a result of these indoctrination processes and curriculum changes. There's another precise indicator of how the Guard became more radical, violent, ideological, and willing to protect the revolution and the Islamic regime. Compared to 2009, when the Green Revolution resulted in 100 deaths in the Guard's response to civilian protests, in 2019 a new wave of protests, this time triggered by issues related to the hijab, the veil women are required to wear, met with a much harsher and more violent response. This was due to a much more cohesive Guard, willing to defend the Islamic revolution. The number of deaths in 2019 was 10,000 civilians or citizens of the country. What are the fundamental principles of this Guard ideology and indoctrination? There's a concept within Shiite Islam that believes in the superiority of a government of clerics, and this is the vision incorporated by the Revolutionary Guard. This concept unites with the idea of expanding this government, this Islamic revolution, to other Islamic nations. These two pillars are part of what the Guard believes it must do. The Revolutionary Guard rejects the concept of a nation-state. In fact, it divides the world into two camps, the land of Muslims and the land of infidels. Muslims must be governed by an imam, a religious leader. In the absence of the imam, he is represented by the supreme leader. All of this legitimizes the export of the revolution, because either you are a Muslim land and need to be governed by the supreme leader, or you are an infidel land. Analyzing the ideological and political books of the revolution or the Revolutionary Guard, another division of the world is perceived. The United States is seen as the great villain, the force of evil, a kind of Satan of the world. And, of course, Iran or the Iranian regime in the Islamic Revolution are the side of good fighting against the side of evil. An extension of this interpretation is that this struggle also extends to another evil regime, Israel and Zionism. Within this logic, it is necessary to exterminate or eliminate what is considered evil, in the same way as other fundamentalist Islamic ideologies. The Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guard understand that Israel is an object of the West to occupy a land that does not belong to them. Therefore, it must be exterminated. The struggle and defense of the Palestinians, from this perspective, means expelling Israel or confronting this evil, this colonizing arm of the West that wants to occupy their lands. In other words, anti-Semitism permeates all aspects of Iran's Islamic ideology. Returning to the Guard's foundations in 2022, a publication by the Guard itself responded about its identity, identifying 3 points: guardians of Islam, soldiers of the supreme leader, and martyrdom for the revolutionary people. It's important to note that revolutionary people refers only to those loyal to the revolution, not to any ordinary Iranian who might have criticisms or not follow the revolutionary precepts. Thus, the Guard is there to serve as martyrs only for the revolutionary people. This ideological doctrine also shapes the Guard's military and strategic traditions, primarily based on 2 pillars: Alavi and Ashura. Alavi refers to Ali, the divinely appointed first Shiite Imam, whose forces lost the Battle of Siffin in 657 AD against Muawiyah, the first caliph of the Umayyad Empire. This marks the beginning of the division between Sunnis and Shiites, who disputed Muhammad's succession. One side defended blood ties while the other did not. This battle signals the beginning of this division amidst a civil war. Shiites believe in Ali's blood tie to Muhammad and consider him the successor, the leader of the Ummah, Islamic community. Sunnis, on the other hand, advocate for a council formed without direct blood ties to Muhammad. Shiite history suggests that Ali was defeated because his soldiers were not loyal to his orders. This interpretation is incorporated into the Revolutionary Guard's doctrine, where total obedience to the supreme leader is fundamental to avoid repeating past failures. The Ashura pillar derives from the date when Imam Hussein, the third Shiite Imam and Ali's grandson, led his small group of soldiers against a massive army of the Umayyad Caliph Yazid at the Battle of Karbala in 680 AD. Although Hussein knew of the imminent defeat, he and his soldiers sacrificed themselves to confront the Umayyads, the first Sunni caliphate, and defend what they believed to be Islam. The Revolutionary Guard also incorporates this element. The enemy must be confronted regardless of the chances of victory. Thus, they commit to an all-or-nothing final struggle, with a willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice for the protection of religious and ideological precepts. In other words, there is a combination of 2 things: maximum submission and obedience to the supreme leader, and the willingness to martyrdom, to death, to sacrifice for the cause. These 2 concepts are incorporated into the ideological doctrine of the Revolutionary Guard. Mahdism and the apocalyptic vision of the Iran-Israel conflict. Understanding Mahdism is fundamental to deciphering the deep motivations of the Revolutionary Guard and the Iranian regime concerning Israel. Mahdism is a central doctrine in Shiite Islam, based on the belief in the return of the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, also known as the Hidden Imam, who is believed to have disappeared in the 9th century and would return at the end of times to establish justice and purify the world from evil. This messianic expectation is not just a passive spiritual belief. It was reinterpreted actively after the Islamic Revolution of 1979, becoming an ideological and strategic engine for the Iranian regime. Shiite tradition states that the Mahdi, hidden since 874 AD, would govern the Islamic community through representatives during a period of minor occultation, which ended in 941. From then on, the major occultation began, where there are no direct representatives, and the Mahdi would be in direct communication only with the highest clerics. For centuries, Shiite clerics adopted a passive stance, awaiting the Imam's return without actively engaging in politics. However, the Islamic Revolution of 1979 radically altered this posture. Ayatollah Khomeini introduced the idea that, in the Mahdi's absence, the clerics should govern on his behalf, preparing the ground for his return. Thus, religious authority was institutionalized in the role of the supreme leader, who came to be seen as the guardian of the jurist, Vilayat-e Faqih, holding divine authority until the Messiah's return. This paradigm shift had profound consequences. The Iranian regime began to see itself as an active agent in the process of preparing for the Mahdi's return. The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, deepened this interpretation, establishing that Iranian society should go through 5 stages to facilitate the advent of the Messiah: an Islamic revolution, an Islamic regime, an Islamic government, an Islamic era, and finally, a universal Islamic civilization. According to Khamenei, the first 2 stages have already been achieved with the revolution and the creation of the regime, while the others are still under construction. The election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in 2005 marked a moment of intensification of Mahdism in Iranian politics. Ahmadinejad, a Basij member and fervent devotee of the doctrine, frequently left an empty chair in official meetings for the Mahdi, demonstrating his expectation of the imminent return. He invested public resources in reforming the Jamkaran Mosque, a sacred place where the 12th Imam is believed to reappear, and built a highway connecting the mosque to Tehran's airport, justifying that the Mahdi could not get stuck in traffic upon his return. Mahdism also began to influence Iran's foreign policy and military actions. The Revolutionary Guard's participation in the Syrian civil war, for example, is interpreted in light of Shiite prophecies that predict the emergence of an evil tyrant, the Sufyani, in the Syria and Iraq region. The appearance of ISIS was seen as a manifestation of this prophecy, and the fight against ISIS gained a religious and apocalyptic character. Young people from the Guard and the Basij are called to fight in Syria not only for strategic reasons but as part of a sacred mission to prepare the ground for the Mahdi's return and protect Shiite holy sites. Similarly, Iran's support for the Houthis in Yemen is interpreted as part of the fulfillment of prophecies that foresee the emergence of a resistance movement in Yemen. The war against Saudi Arabia, Iran's main regional rival, is seen as a struggle against the Sunni Caliphate, referring to the ancient historical divisions between Shiites and Sunnis. In the Mahdiist view, the world is divided between good Shiites and evil United States, Israel and Sunnis, and the final victory will belong to the Shiites in the great apocalyptic battle that will precede the Messiah's return. This apocalyptic perspective also influences the interpretation of global events. Iranian clerics, including the supreme leader, view the war between Russia and Ukraine as a prelude to the world war that will precede the final battle between good and evil. Iran's support for Russia is justified, in part, by this view, as they believe that current geopolitical movements are aligned with the signs of the Mahdi's return. Thus, Iranian foreign policy is shaped not only by strategic interests but by a religious narrative that anticipates the final confrontation between the forces of good and evil. Mahdism, therefore, is not just a spiritual belief, it is a driving force that guides the actions of the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guard. The destruction of Israel is seen as a necessary step for the Mahdi's return, as Israel is considered an obstacle and a symbol of evil that must be eliminated for the Messiah to return. This vision gives the conflict with Israel a transcendental and apocalyptic dimension, which goes far beyond conventional territorial or political disputes. The fight against Israel is, in the regime's view, a sacred mission, an indispensable stage on the path to the advent of the perfect world under the rule of the 12th Imam. This intense indoctrination, based on Mahdism, explains why the Revolutionary Guard has become increasingly radical, violent, and willing to sacrifice. Guard members are educated to see themselves as soldiers of the supreme leader and guardians of Islam, ready for martyrdom in the name of the sacred cause. The cult of the Mahdi reinforces the idea that final victory is inevitable, even if the path is marked by suffering and sacrifice. This mentality is fundamental to understanding why the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guard adopt such intransigent positions regarding Israel and the West. The incorporation of Mahdism into the regime's official doctrine also had an impact on Iranian society. From 2009 onwards, with the Green Revolution and the growing repression of reformists, the regime intensified ideological indoctrination, replacing less aligned figures with fervent devotees of Mahdism. This change resulted in a more cohesive, radical, and committed political and military elite to the apocalyptic worldview. The Revolutionary Guard, in particular, began to act as the executor of prophecies, preparing the ground for the Messiah's return and eliminating the obstacles that stand in the way, such as Israel and the United States. In summary, Mahdism is the key to understanding the radicalization of the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guard. It transforms the conflict with Israel into a holy war, a cosmic battle between good and evil, with consequences that transcend the borders of the Middle East. The expectation of the Mahdi's return grants the regime religious legitimacy and an unwavering motivation that guides its internal and external actions. This perspective helps explain why diplomatic negotiations with Iran are so difficult and why the conflict with Israel seems insurmountable, as it is rooted in deep religious beliefs and an apocalyptic worldview. Exporting the revolution. The role of Iran and the Revolutionary Guard in the Middle East. The export of the Islamic Revolution has been one of the central pillars of Iranian foreign policy since 1979. This strategy is not limited to promoting religious or ideological values. It actively seeks to influence other countries and movements, especially in the Middle East region. The main instrument of this policy is the Revolutionary Guard, which, through its Quds Force, acts as the regime's international arm, supporting allied groups, providing training, weapons, and resources, and promoting the Iranian agenda in various conflict scenarios. The concept of exporting the revolution is deeply rooted in the Iranian constitution, which assigns the Revolutionary Guard the mission of extending the sovereignty of God's law globally. This mission translates into concrete actions that go far beyond Iran's borders. The Revolutionary Guard does not recognize the traditional concept of a nation-state. For its members, the world is divided between the land of Muslims, which should be governed by the clerics, and the land of infidels, which needs to be converted or confronted. This vision justifies Iran's intervention in regional conflicts and the formation of alliances with groups that share its ideology or oppose its adversaries. Support for Hezbollah in Lebanon is one of the most emblematic examples of this strategy. Since the 1980s, Iran has provided training, weapons, and financial support to Hezbollah, transforming it into one of the most powerful organizations in the country. Hezbollah is not just an armed group. It holds political, social, and religious influence in Lebanon, acting as a true state within a state. The relationship between Iran and Hezbollah is symbiotic. Iran secures its strategic presence on the border with Israel, while Hezbollah receives resources and ideological legitimacy to expand its influence. This alliance is seen as a showcase for the exported revolution, demonstrating that the Iranian model can be replicated in other contexts. The Revolutionary Guard's participation in the Syrian civil war is another fundamental example of exporting the revolution. Since the beginning of the conflict, Iran has sent thousands of Guard and Basij fighters to support Bashar al-Assad's regime. This intervention was motivated not only by strategic reasons but also by religious and ideological issues. Syria houses important Shiite holy sites, such as the Sayyida Zainab Shrine in Damascus, which is revered by Iranians. Furthermore, Assad's victory strengthens the so-called Axis of Resistance, composed of Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and other allied groups, which oppose Israel and the West. The Revolutionary Guard acted as a direct combat force, trained local militias and coordinated military operations, consolidating Iran's presence in the country. Support for the Houthis in Yemen is another expression of the policy of exporting the revolution. The Houthis, a Shiite rebel group, receive weapons, training, and financial support from Iran, which sees them as allies in the fight against Saudi Arabia and its Western partners. The war in Yemen is interpreted in light of Shiite prophecies, which foresee the emergence of a resistance movement in the region. For Iran, the Houthis' victory would represent an expansion of its influence and a symbolic defeat for Saudi Arabia, its main regional rival. The Revolutionary Guard plays a central role in this support, coordinating the shipment of weapons, drones, and missiles, and training fighters to operate on Yemeni soil. In addition to these examples, Iran also supports Shiite groups in Iraq, such as the Popular Mobilization Units, which played a fundamental role in the fight against ISIS. The objective is to ensure Iranian presence and political influence in the neighboring country, strengthening the so-called Shiite Crescent, a strip of territory extending from Iran to Lebanon, passing through Iraq and Syria. This strategy aims to isolate Israel, weaken the United States, and consolidate Iran's power in the region. The export of the revolution also manifests in cultural and religious initiatives. Iran funds the construction of mosques, schools, and cultural centers in various countries, promoting Shiite doctrine and the revolution's ideology. These initiatives seek to create a base of social and religious support for the regime, as well as strengthen ties with Shiite communities around the world. The Revolutionary Guard supervises many of these activities, ensuring that they are aligned with the country's strategic objectives. Iran's regional influence is therefore the result of a combination of factors: military, financial, and logistical support for allied groups, promotion of religious and ideological values, and direct intervention in conflicts. This strategy is sustained by a worldview that sees Iran as the center of a global revolution, destined to confront the West, Israel, and Sunni regimes. The Revolutionary Guard is the primary executor of this policy, acting as a combat force, intelligence agency, and propaganda instrument. The export of the revolution, however, faces resistance and challenges. Many Sunni countries, such as Saudi Arabia, view Iran as a threat to regional stability and seek to contain its influence. The United States and its allies also adopt policies of sanctions and pressure to limit Iranian power. Internally, Iranian society is divided between supporters of the regime and critics who desire reforms and greater openness. Despite these challenges, the Revolutionary Guard continues to play a central role in promoting the Iranian agenda, both within and outside the country. In summary, the export of the revolution is one of Iran's main strategies to expand its influence and consolidate its power in the Middle East. The Revolutionary Guard is the main instrument of this policy, acting as a military force, intelligence agency, and promoter of religious and ideological values. Support for groups like Hezbollah, intervention in Syria, and involvement in Yemen are concrete examples of this strategy, which seeks to transform Iran into a regional and global power hub, advocating a worldview based on the struggle between good and evil, between the faithful and the infidels, and between the revolution and the status quo. The impact of apocalyptic doctrine on Iranian politics and society. The apocalyptic doctrine of Mahdism, incorporated into the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guard, is not limited to the realm of faith or the military sphere. It deeply infiltrates the politics, culture, and daily life of Iranian society, shaping behaviors, state decisions, and the very perception of national identity. Contemporary Iran, by adopting a radicalized Shiite theocracy, has made the active waiting for the return of the 12th Imam not just a religious dogma, but a state directive, legitimizing internal and external actions in the name of a sacred mission. The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, by deepening the doctrine of Mahdism, established that Iranian society should be prepared in 5 stages for the advent of the Messiah: Islamic revolution, Islamic regime, Islamic government, Islamic era, and Islamic civilization. This vision is not merely theoretical. It translates into public policies, educational reforms, social control, and repression of any movement that threatens the ideological cohesion of the regime. The indoctrination apparatus, led by the Revolutionary Guard and the Basij, operates at all levels from schools to universities, state-owned companies, and media outlets, promoting a culture of obedience, sacrifice, and readiness for martyrdom in the name of the revolution. The repression of reformist or liberal movements is one of the most visible aspects of this impact. Since the Green Revolution in 2009, when massive protests challenged the legitimacy of the elections and the regime itself, the authorities' response has been increasingly brutal. The number of dead and imprisoned drastically increased in the 2019 protests, especially among young people and women who defied the mandatory use of the hijab. The Revolutionary Guard, now more cohesive and radicalized, acted with extreme violence, justifying its actions as a defense of the revolution and preparation for the Mahdi's return. The criterion for advancement within the Guard and the government became ideological loyalty, no longer technical competence, creating a homogeneous political and military elite deeply committed to the regime's apocalyptic vision. In the international arena, this doctrine legitimizes the export of the revolution and intervention in regional conflicts. Iran's involvement in Syria, its support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shiite militias in Iraq are presented to the population as part of a sacred mission, aligned with the prophecies of Mahdism. The sacrifice of soldiers and volunteers is exalted as martyrdom, and the official narrative associates every victory or defeat with signs of the end times, reinforcing the idea that Iran is at the center of a cosmic battle between good and evil. The Iranian economy is also deeply affected by this doctrine. The Revolutionary Guard controls strategic sectors such as oil, civil construction, telecommunications, and foreign trade, using the profits to finance its internal and external operations. Economic control serves not only to sustain the military machine but also to ensure the loyalty of segments of society, distributing benefits to allies and punishing opponents. Corruption, clientelism, and economic repression become instruments for maintaining power, always justified by the need to protect the revolution and prepare the ground for the Mahdi's return. The culture of martyrdom, central to the Revolutionary Guard's doctrine, is promoted from childhood. Textbooks, television programs, public ceremonies, and even sports competitions exalt historical figures who sacrificed themselves for their faith, such as Imam Hussein in Karbala. Hussein's example, who faced a much larger army in the name of justice, is constantly cited as a model to be followed by all Iranians, especially the youth. This culture reinforces the willingness to sacrifice and the acceptance of violence as a legitimate means to achieve religious and political objectives. The psychological impact of this doctrine on the population is profound. Many young people, especially those living in urban areas with internet access, feel divided between the religious tradition imposed by the regime and the modern values arriving from the West. Rigid social control, constant Basij surveillance, and exemplary punishments for dissidents create a climate of fear and conformity, but also fuel resentment and the desire for change. The regime, in turn, intensifies indoctrination, fearing that the loss of ideological cohesion could weaken its legitimacy and open space for internal revolts. In the religious sphere, the apocalyptic doctrine of Mahdism reinforces the division between Shiites and Sunnis, fueling historical rivalries and justifying hostility against countries like Saudi Arabia and organizations like ISIS. Iran presents itself as the true defender of Islam, in opposition to what it considers corrupt and deviant regimes. This rhetoric is used to mobilize internal and external support, creating a collective identity based on the fight against common enemies and the expectation of a glorious future under the Mahdi's leadership. The influence of this doctrine extends beyond Iran's borders. Shiite communities in other countries, especially in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, are targeted by indoctrination campaigns and financial, military, and logistical support. The goal is to create a network of allies loyal to the Iranian supreme leader, capable of acting as an extension of the Revolutionary Guard in different regional contexts. This strategy strengthens the so-called Shiite Crescent and expands the reach of the Islamic Revolution, making Iran a central actor in the geopolitics of the Middle East. In summary, the impact of the apocalyptic doctrine of Mahdism on Iranian politics and society is totalizing. It shapes the power structure, defines economic priorities, guides foreign policy, determines cultural and psychological patterns, and legitimizes internal repression. Iran, by transforming a religious belief into state policy, has created a system where faith, ideology, and power are inextricably intertwined, making the country a unique case in the contemporary international landscape. Understanding this phenomenon is essential for any analysis of the Middle East, especially regarding relations between Iran and Israel, as it reveals the deep roots and ultimate motivations of a conflict that transcends mere politics and reaches the most intimate spheres of faith and collective identity. Israel, defense and response strategies against the Iranian threat. The increasing radicalization of the Iranian regime, sustained by an apocalyptic doctrine and the export of revolution, has transformed Iran into the primary existential challenge for Israel in the 21st century. The Israeli perception is that Iran represents not just a conventional military threat, but an ideological enemy willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to fulfill its religious and geopolitical mission. This threat manifests on multiple fronts: the Iranian nuclear program, the presence of hostile Shiite militias on Israel's borders, support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Iran's growing influence in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. The Israeli response to this scenario is multifaceted, involving military, diplomatic, technological, and intelligence strategies. Israel has invested heavily in modernizing its defense forces (IDF), developing advanced missile defense systems such as the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow, capable of intercepting short, medium, and long-range rockets and missiles. These systems are constantly being improved in the face of the threat of coordinated attacks by multiple Iran-allied groups, especially Hezbollah, which possesses an estimated arsenal of over 100,000 rockets pointed at Israeli territory. In the field of intelligence, Israel maintains one of the world's most sophisticated networks for collecting and analyzing information, with secret operations conducted by Mossad and Amman, military intelligence. These agencies are responsible for monitoring the progress of the Iranian nuclear program, identifying terrorism financing networks, and neutralizing threats before they materialize. Various operations attributed to Mossad, such as the theft of Iranian nuclear archives in 2018 and the elimination of nuclear scientists involved in Iran's atomic program, demonstrate Israel's willingness to act preventively to contain Iranian advancement. Israeli diplomacy has also adapted to the new regional context. In recent decades, Israel has sought to strengthen alliances with Sunni Arab countries, traditionally rivals, but who share concerns about Iranian expansion. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020 with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, represent a landmark in this geopolitical reconfiguration, creating a common front to contain Iran's influence. Dialogue with Saudi Arabia, although not yet formalized in a peace agreement, is advancing on security and intelligence matters, highlighting the centrality of the Iranian threat in Israeli foreign policy. In the international arena, Israel acts decisively to sensitize global powers, especially the United States and European countries, about the risks of the Iranian nuclear program. The Israeli government argues that a nuclear Iran would represent not only a regional but a global threat, capable of triggering an arms race in the Middle East and strengthening extremist regimes and groups. Therefore, Israel constantly pressures for economic and political sanctions to be maintained or expanded against Tehran, and does not rule out the possibility of preventive military action should Iran cross what are considered acceptable limits for its atomic program. In addition to external actions, Israel invests in internal resilience. The government promotes civil preparedness campaigns for conflict situations, invests in civil defense infrastructure, and develops protocols for rapid response to missile and drone attacks. Israeli society, marked by decades of conflict, maintains a high degree of mobilization and readiness, with alert systems and air raid shelters throughout the national territory. Finally, the psychological and symbolic dimension of the conflict cannot be ignored. Official Israeli discourse emphasizes the need for survival in the face of an enemy that openly preaches its destruction, reinforcing national cohesion and the legitimacy of defense actions. At the same time, Israel seeks to avoid escalation into an all-out war, aware of the human, economic, and political costs of a direct confrontation with Iran and its allies. The balance between deterrence, prevention, and diplomacy is, therefore, the central axis of Israel's strategy against the Iranian threat. The Iran-Israel conflict and the global chessboard, powers, alliances, and rivalries. The confrontation between Iran and Israel, although deeply rooted in religious and ideological issues, doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's embedded in a global geopolitical chessboard, where world powers, regional alliances, and strategic interests intertwine, making the conflict even more complex and dangerous. The United States traditionally plays the role of Israel's main ally, providing military, economic, and diplomatic support. This support manifests in billions of dollars in financial aid, as well as the transfer of cutting-edge military technology, in addition to political protection in international forums like the UN Security Council. The relationship between the United States and Iran, on the other hand, is marked by decades of hostility. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which overthrew the American allied Shah and established the Shiite theocracy, Washington and Tehran have confronted each other on multiple fronts. Economic sanctions, embargoes, cyber-sabotage, and indirect confrontations through regional allies. The Iranian nuclear program is the main point of contention. Israel and the US consider the possibility of Iran developing nuclear weapons unacceptable, fearing it would alter the regional balance of power and pose an existential threat to the Jewish state. Russia, for its part, maintains a pragmatic relationship with Iran, especially after the start of the Syrian civil war. Moscow and Tehran have worked together to ensure the survival of Bashar al-Assad's regime, consolidating a military and strategic partnership that challenges American and Israeli interests in the region. Russia provides military technology, anti-aircraft defense cooperation, and diplomatic support to Iran, while also maintaining open channels with Israel to avoid direct confrontations in Syria. China emerges as another relevant actor, seeking to expand its influence in the Middle East through economic investments, energy agreements, and infrastructure projects, such as the New Silk Road. Beijing maintains commercial relations with Iran, especially in oil purchases, challenging the sanctions imposed by the United States. At the same time, China seeks to maintain good relations with Israel, investing in technology and infrastructure, and avoiding explicitly taking sides in the conflict. Regionally, the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia is another central factor. The Saudis, leaders of the Sunni bloc and main rivals of Shiite Iran, see the expansion of Iranian influence as a direct threat to their security and hegemony. This rivalry manifests in proxy conflicts in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, where both countries support opposing sides. The recent movement of diplomatic rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, mediated by China, signals an attempt to reduce tensions, but does not eliminate historical distrust and conflicting interests. The Abraham Accords, which normalized Israel's relations with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, represent a significant shift in the regional balance. These alliances aim to create a containment bloc against Iranian influence, strengthening military, intelligence, and economic cooperation between Israel and Sunni Arab countries. Dialogue with Saudi Arabia, although not yet formalized, is progressing on security issues, highlighting the centrality of the Iranian threat to these countries' foreign policy. The European Union, in turn, adopts an ambiguous stance. While condemning the Iranian nuclear program and threats to Israel's existence, it seeks to maintain channels of dialogue with Tehran to preserve the nuclear deal, JCPOA, and ensure energy and commercial stability. European sanctions on Iran, though significant, are less stringent than American ones, and countries like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom act as mediators in nuclear negotiations. The global chessboard, therefore, is marked by flexible alliances, historical rivalries, and divergent strategic interests. The Iran-Israel conflict serves as a catalyst for the formation of regional and global blocs, influencing foreign policy decisions, military investments, and diplomatic moves of the world's major powers. Future perspectives: escalation, stagnation, or paths to peace. The conflict between Iran and Israel, rooted in ideological, religious, and strategic rivalries, presents three main scenarios for the future: escalation, stagnation, or an unlikely path to peace. Each of these scenarios is shaped by internal and external factors, decisions by regional leaders, global dynamics, and above all, the depth of the beliefs that underpin both sides. Escalation of the conflict. The possibility of escalation is real and concerning. The advancement of the Iranian nuclear program, even in the face of international sanctions and pressure, is seen by Israel as an existential threat. The Israeli government has made it clear on various occasions that it will not allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons, signaling a willingness for preventive actions, including military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. On the other hand, Iran, supported by allies such as Hezbollah, Shiite militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen, has the capacity to retaliate on multiple fronts, increasing the risk of a large-scale regional conflict. Furthermore, the presence of external actors like the United States and Russia could transform a local escalation into an international crisis. The U.S. maintains security commitments to Israel and military bases near Iran, while Russia, an ally of Tehran in Syria, could act as a deterrent or an additional complicating factor, depending on the global context. Stagnation and low-intensity conflict. The most probable scenario, at least in the short and medium term, is stagnation, characterized by a low-intensity conflict, marked by targeted attacks, sabotage operations, selective assassinations, and aggressive rhetoric. Israel will continue to invest in intelligence and covert operations to delay the Iranian nuclear program, while Iran will continue to strengthen its regional influence networks and its deterrence capabilities. This state of veiled war tends to perpetuate itself as long as there are no structural changes in the regimes or a significant reconfiguration of regional and global alliances. The balance is fragile, and any miscalculation could trigger a rapid and uncontrolled escalation. Paths to peace, barriers and possibilities. The path to peace is the most unlikely but not impossible. For concrete progress to occur, profound changes would be needed in both Iranian domestic policy and Israeli and international postures. In Iran's case, a political opening with the weakening of the Revolutionary Guard's power and a reinterpretation of Mahdism and apocalyptic doctrine could create space for real negotiations. On the other hand, Israel would need to offer security guarantees and, eventually, accept some degree of Iran's integration into the international system, provided it is under strict supervision. Mediation by global powers such as the United States, the European Union, Russia, and China could be decisive, but it faces significant obstacles, such as mutual distrust, divergent interests, and the volatility of the regional scenario. Previous experiences such as the 2015 nuclear deal, JCPOA, show that progress is possible, but fragile and easily reversed in the face of political changes or breakdowns in trust. The role of civil society in new generations. Another relevant factor is the role of civil society and new generations, especially in Iran. The increasing access to information, contact with Western values, and the weariness caused by decades of repression and economic hardship fuel the desire for change among young Iranians. Protest movements like those in 2009 and 2019 signal that there is potential groundwork for reforms, although repression remains intense. In Israel, society maintains a high degree of cohesion in the face of the Iranian threat, but there is also an internal debate about the limits of military response and the pursuit of diplomatic solutions. The future of the conflict could, therefore, be influenced by internal pressures in both countries, especially if there are leadership changes or significant social ruptures. Catholic perspective, prayer for peace and dialogue. From the perspective of Catholic tradition, the pursuit of peace is an evangelical imperative. The Church's magisterium has always advocated dialogue, reconciliation, and the promotion of justice as paths to overcoming conflicts. The Middle East, birthplace of the three great monotheistic religions, is also called to be a land of encounter and hope. Prayer, diplomacy, and commitment to human dignity are fundamental instruments to break the cycle of violence and open space for coexistence based on mutual respect. Final reflection, lessons, hope, and the role of dialogue. Throughout this extensive deep dive into the history, ideology, and geopolitics of the conflict between Iran and Israel, it's clear that this is one of the most complex and multifaceted clashes of the 21st century. It's not merely a territorial or strategic dispute, but a clash of worldviews, deep religious beliefs, and power projects that span generations, borders, and cultures. The radicalization of the Iranian regime, the apocalyptic doctrine of Mahdism, and the actions of the Revolutionary Guard have created a scenario where the logic of holy war and existential resistance overshadows diplomatic rationality and the pursuit of peaceful solutions. Israel, in turn, responds with a combination of resilience, technology, alliances, and diplomacy, aware that it faces an enemy willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in the name of a religious mission. Israeli society, marked by decades of conflict, has developed a culture of readiness and unity in the face of the Iranian threat, but also carries the burden of living under constant tension and uncertainty. The global chessboard adds layers of complexity, with world powers like the United States, Russia, and China influencing the course of events, each guided by their own strategic interests. The rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the Abraham Accords, and the internal dynamics of each country shape the possibilities of escalation, stagnation, or however unlikely paths to peace. However, even in the face of so many obstacles, history reveals that change is possible. Movements toward openness, pressures from civil society, and generational transformations can, over time, create openings for dialogue and reconciliation. The Catholic tradition, by proposing prayer, dialogue, and commitment to human dignity, offers a perspective of hope, reminding us that peace is always possible when there is goodwill, justice, and mutual respect. The Middle East, the birthplace of the great monotheistic religions, holds within it the potential to also be a place of encounter and overcoming. The path is long and arduous, but a deep understanding of the conflict's roots is the first step toward any attempt at a lasting solution. May this study serve as an invitation to reflection, to respect for differences, and to the incessant search for bridges of dialogue amidst the ruins of discord.